think we're good, buddy.
That's how he gets to leave on a.
You have to speak into it, John.
We have to.
He gets to leave on a big note here.
I'd like to call this meeting to order, and before we get started, you all probably wonder why Mayor Nelson's not here. He called in sick this morning with laryngitis, and so you're stuck with me for the day. I've asked my colleagues here to behave themselves, and they promised me they won't. So at least help the rest of you. If you help me out, I'd appreciate that. Let's start with an invocation, and Pastor Laval.
Please stand.
Please stand.
Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you that you have given us government to our benefit. We thank you for all the people who are here serving, giving many hours and days and years of their lives for our community. We pray, Lord, for your blessings upon them. We pray for all those who also serve our community, fire, police departments. We pray now for wisdom, discernment, and guidance for this meeting. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Pledge of allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Councilman McIntosh? Here. Councilwoman Martin?
Here.
Councilman Slachta?
Here.
Mayor Nelson? Deputy Mayor Spear?
Here.
Councilwoman Simons?
Aye, here.
Councilman Lockhart?
Here. Thank you very much. Okay, let's start with public comment on agenda items, and please limit these to items that are on the agenda. You'll have 2 opportunities later to address items of more general concern. Rick, I guess we're starting with you.
I guess. Good morning, Rick Steinmeier. How do you put a value on somebody? Why we try and do it scientifically and hire experts from out of town that compare, try and come up with a value for somebody's worth. It's an impossible task. Anybody that's ever employed anybody else, everybody thinks they're worth more than they are. Or, I remember one time I was a new hire with a management company, and the regional manager says, "Hey, Rick, if I paid you 3 times what I'm paying you now, would you do a better job?" Whoa. I said, "No, I don't think so. I'm doing the best job I can now." Well, what if I would have said, "Yeah, I'd do a better job"? Well, you're doing a pretty crappy job now, aren't you then, Rick? So that's a really tough question. And just so is sitting in judgment of these other people. Now, in this survey, is private sector data 6%. Now, that's not a very big number. Somewhere in here, it's eternal equality. Now, there's a term that really gets you. And this other one that's, oh yeah, the wages of public sector employees on average is 0.2% less than, that's not a significant number, 0.2%. It's less, that's not a significant number. But again, I don't mean to criticize, this is a Herculean task that the city manager's taken on. It wasn't taken on by the last city manager. And best of luck, and let's not burn any bridges for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Good morning, City and Council. My name is Greg DeWitt, President of the Bonita Springs Professional Firefighters, Local 3440. I just want to tell you guys how excited we are about sponsoring Movies in the Park again this year. It'll be our 2nd year. We're real excited. We're thinking about doing the one in April so we can promote changing the batteries in your smoke detectors when we turn back the clock. So we just want to let you guys know we're very excited about it, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next. Any other public comment? Okay.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
You've seen me before, I think. My name's Philip Shakwa. I own and operate Augustino's Furniture Store with my father. And I've been following the elections and interested in hearing what everybody has to say in terms of the city. Kind of last-minute homework, I guess. I don't follow it every day, but I just want to let you know that I respect everything you've done. I've been on both sides of the table with you during different times, and unfortunately I've gotten acquainted during a lot of challenging times. But all for the better, and it's gotten me to be able to appreciate the work you do for the city. So, I know being in the political spotlight, it becomes quite unnerving, I guess is the word. You can be on somebody's side one minute, and the next minute you don't know where they stand. And I think Mr. Spear and myself, Councilman Spear and myself, have been there before. And I just want to express that I've never meant any disrespect at any time. I've just been in different places during my life, and certain things seem to take priority. My family's always my priority. That's always number one. So I think amongst all, whoever wins these elections, I think it needs to be somebody who's noble in character. It shouldn't be just about money. It needs to be somebody who's compassionate about the community, someone who's willing to reach out to those who are in need of help when they're down, and not kick them when they're down. And there are individuals that are capable of kicking people when they're down that are running for office. And I have a personal experience with one of them that I'm going to sidestep for now. But I liked Mr. Brunswick's idea of changing the name of Old 41 to something different. I think Historical 41 would be interesting. DRGR, yeah, we need some kind of business development to bring in jobs and into the community. Old 41, though, is first thing I thought of when I drove down for Old 41 was, boy, what's going on here? Not a whole lot. But over time, I've lived there. I've lived here for 6 years now in Bonita Springs. And I have to say that Old 41 is just fine. I like taking that trip down Old Memory Lane. And if we can just put a little polish on it, I think it's just as well that we do it that way without spending a whole lot of money that's maybe not necessary, gets us into a rut, and sticks our neck out too far. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
Morning.
Good morning.
I'm Pat Maddock with the Bonita Springs Historical Society.
You want to pull the microphone down?
Is that better?
Speak right into it, and it
Okay.
works better.
I'm Pat Maddock with the Bonita Springs Historical Society, and we're planning our big fish fry, and we're so pleased to have you people consider co-sponsoring it with us. So I just wanted to come up and say thank you, and see you at the fish fry. February 12th, Sunday, 12 to 2, right after church. Just come on. We'll be anxious to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay. We'll go on to the proclamations and presentations, and there's a bunch of them today, so.
We're of 1812.
Why not?
That's from history.
Remember our history.
First of all, I'd like to ask Jane Swanson to join me up here, please.
You're lovely and talented.
Jane, we kidded about this last night, about whether you'd make it till today, and here you are. So, Carl at 5 o'clock was actually giving her a hard time about getting out of the office on time, and she was plowing through some last emails. So, so we had a little laugh about that. So, this is a proclamation recognizing Jane for 5 years of service to the community. Those of us here on City Council, as much as more than anybody else, probably know what a wonderful job she does. She's the conduit that allows the seven of us all to bug Carl as much as we like to, and she does things with tremendous good humor. And so, Jane, I'd like to recognize you for your 5 years of service, and hope we have many more years with you.
Thank you, Jane.
The ladies from the Barefoot Beach chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, Shirley Nix, is she, Shirley and others, please come up. Let me read this proclamation. Whereas 2012 is the year of the bicentennial of the War of 1812, and whereas had that War of 1812 taken place, had not the war taken place after the Revolutionary War, our history would not be as it is today because it enabled us to maintain our independence, solidify our land borders and high seas, to be respected by other countries to this day. Whereas certain national treasures such as the portrait of George Washington, copies of our Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence were kept safe to the concern of Dolly Madison and are there for us to view today. And whereas our national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner that we sing at many gatherings today, was born in the heart of Francis Scott Key, and on the fourth stanza there is a phrase we use today on our currency, "In God we put our trust." And whereas the lives and personal properties of our ancestors who fought in this war were put at stake, the War of 1812 is not a war that nobody won, as some may believe. It was a war that gave us victory in maintaining and building on what we fought for in the Revolutionary War, and a constitution which no other country possesses. Now, therefore, I, Ben Nelson Jr., on behalf of the City Council, do hereby proclaim the year of 2012 as a celebration to commemorate the bicentennial of the War of 1812, and urge all citizens to observe this year and join in with individual and group programs, ceremonies, and activities to reflect on the wills of our ancestors to build a country of freedom which no other country possesses. Signed on the 18th of January 2012. Thank you. Okay. Shirley's going to say something here.
City Council members, on behalf of the Barefoot Beach chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, we would like to thank you and the City of Bonita Beach for granting our request to issue a proclamation to celebrate the bicentennial of the War of 1812, a war that many have forgotten. It is a special time for our chapter because students in some of the Bonita Beach schools have participated in our annual DAR essay contest this year called Young America Takes a Stand, the War of 1812. Again, on behalf of the Barefoot Beach chapter of the DAR, we thank you very much.
Thank you, and we also thank everybody in DAR for all they do to remind us of our history, and particularly our longer past history. You guys do a great job in keeping us all conscious of where we all have come from. So thanks again.
Thanks for mentioning Dolly Madison.
Good ice cream.
Awesome, awesome lady. Cool.
I like it better.
Councilmember McIntosh, I'm going to put you in timeout here in a minute. I'd like to ask Chief Kinsey and the firefighters who are with us today to all come before us, please.
What a good-looking bunch. See you, Chief.
Morning, Chief.
Hey, Chief, while I got you here, put this in your pocket and distribute this.
The purpose of this presentation is to recognize Chief Kinsey and the firefighters for their outstanding service in the high-angle rescue from the Bonita Springs Fire and Control and Rescue District that happened last week. There was some unbelievable acts of bravery and heroism that these gentlemen performed last week. And let me share a special message from Mayor Nelson. When I got the email from him this morning, not only asking me, but telling me I was going to run the meeting today, he expressed special concern about not being here to recognize the bravery and heroism that you guys performed last week, and he wanted me to express that. So we're here to express our heartfelt appreciation for your work day in and day out, and on these special instances when you guys go above and beyond what the rest of us are capable of doing. Thank you so very much on behalf of the community. Deputy Chief Giuliano. Jesse Cottrell. He's not here. Andrew Schmidt. Adam Hughes. Thomas Harrison. Richard Scott. Manuel Hernandez, not here. There better be one more. Greg DeWitt.
Hey.
Once again, thank you very much. Phil, I'd like to ask you to say a few words. One of the things that I remember hearing after 9/11 about firefighters, first responders, that I think really sums it up. When things happen, when danger happens, the natural response is to run away from that danger. The natural response that you guys have is to run towards that danger. And for that, we really, really thank you. Phil, could you say a couple words?
Yes, sir. I'd just like to say on behalf of the district and the firefighters here that we certainly appreciate the recognition, but however, that's our job. And we're here and we're always at your service.
Thank you very much. Phil, could you stay up here for another minute? We have another. We have a proclamation today. This has been on the agenda for some time. Whereas the safe use of hazardous materials is essential to business, industry, and local governments to maintain economic stability and protect the citizens of the 9th Planning District of Florida. Whereas it is essential to plan and prepare for the accidental release of hazardous materials and to protect the well-being of all citizens and visitors in the district. Whereas response teams such as fire, police, and emergency medical services must know the types of hazardous materials and chemicals that are being used and stored in the event of an incident. Whereas all citizens have a right to know the types of hazardous materials and chemicals in their communities and a right to know the proper procedures to take in case of a chemical accident or emergency. Whereas it is important to promote chemical safety to the public and private schools of the region and to offer chemistry education to students. Now therefore I, Ben Nelson, on behalf of the City Council of the City of Bonita Springs, do hereby proclaim that the Southwest Florida Local Emergency Planning Committee recognizes the importance of community awareness of the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act enacted by Congress, and hereby declares the week of January 22 through 28 as Hazardous Materials Awareness Week in Southwest Florida. Signed this 18th day of January by Ben L. Nelson, Jr., Mayor.
Yeah, John.
Ben does that so much better than I do. The next item is a presentation by URS Corporation regarding the preliminary design study for the widening of Old 41 Road from Bonita Beach Road to the South Corporate Limits County line. Daryl, it's all yours. Hang on a second. Let me turn the microphone on.
Good morning. A few years ago, we were approached first by Collier County regarding Old 41 south of Bonita Beach Road. They were initiating a study to widen that section of roadway and wanted to coordinate with the City of Bonita Springs. At about the same time, the Seminole Gulf Railroad expressed their concern with the condition of the railroad crossing in that same stretch. And we were kind of caught because we could understand their concern with the crossing, yet we did not want to build something that would be outdated and necessarily reconstructed in a few years when we did actually widen Old 41. So as a result, we have put some money in the CIP primarily for the railroad crossing, and we retained URS Corporation to do a preliminary design study so that we have at least some guidelines to go by as we start work on this area. Our goals primarily were to define what, in general, the railroad crossing would look like, in general, the right-of-way needs, and give us some assistance in budgeting for future improvements. So we have a presentation this morning, a short presentation of the report, and have Domingo Noriega and Srinivas Mika with us to give us that report. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Councilman. Really happy to be here. Last time I was here, I presented for the traffic study on Bonita Beach Road, and I can see it's under construction now, so really happy about that progress. Gonna do a very brief presentation about the findings of our corridor study for all 41 from Bonita Beach Road to the Collier line. Before, I want to also acknowledge Mohsen Salehi of Salehi Consulting. He's part of the team, and he's done a great job for us in this study. Oops, I think I did something that I wasn't supposed to. Let me check and see. Did you go into the presentation? I'm sorry, I think I clicked the wrong slide there. Technology. So I'm going to talk about the existing conditions on the road, future traffic conditions. Here's the road. It's basically our study is 1.2 miles from Bonita Beach Road to the Collier line. It's an undivided arterial, 45 miles an hour. There's no sidewalks or bike lanes, and the right-of-way varies from 90 to 143 feet, which is really good because, as Srinivas will tell you later, we can actually get most of our improvement, our future cross-section within the right-of-way, so that's really good. And there's no roadway lighting in the road. It's very sensitive. Okay. This is the existing typical section. It's actually, there's a lot of transitions and turn lanes, and there's a section just south of Bonita Beach Road where you have almost like a third lane in between, but it basically is a two-lane road with this right-of-way. Utilities are located mostly on the west side, and there's a lift station that is just 15 feet from the edge of the pavement, and that's something that we're coordinating with the utilities department to see what's the best option to minimize its impacts. But it's very close, so it's probably going to get impacted. Another key element in this corridor is the Seminole Gulf Railroad crossing. Even though there's not a lot of train activity there, it is an active rail line, and it's in pretty bad condition. And rehabilitation is something that should be happening hopefully pretty soon. There's two major intersections. There's Bonita Beach Road and then Mediterra, which serves that residential development. And as far as the traffic right now, you have about 12,000 vehicles just south of Bonita Beach Road and about 10,600 near Mediterra. So this is kind of reaching the capacity of a two-lane road. A two-lane road can carry about 15,000, so you're almost there in this road. The level of service at the Bonita Beach Road intersection is mostly throughout the year level of service D, which is kind of okay. But it fails sometimes during peak season. In this area, you have a very fluctuating seasonal traffic, and the traffic gets a lot heavier now in winter, so that's when you're gonna see the failing levels of service. As far as safety, there has been 61 crashes in 4 years in this corridor, but 58 of them have been right at the intersection. The future traffic projections, we applied the Lee Collier travel demand model, and I want to thank the Bonita CRA, which they gave us a lot of help on kind of getting a good picture of what's the future developments in the area. But basically, when we run the model, we can see that for 2035, this road is going to have a pretty good increase in traffic. So it's going to go from what I was telling you, 12,000 now, to 23,500 in 2035, just south of Bonita Beach Road. With that, I want to pass it over to Srinivas, and he's going to talk about the alternatives that we run and what is the proposed improvements, and then I'll finish the presentation.
Thank you, Domingo. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about the future conditions and the alternatives we came up for this project. Basically, just now Domingo was saying the traffic has significant increase
Sir,
from.
sir, could you speak a little closer to the mic? So the folks at home can hear you.
There is a significant increase in traffic compared to the existing conditions, and the first thing we did as soon as we established the future traffic was to analyze the roadway as is today with future traffic, and all the segments and the intersections were failing if we were to not do any improvement to the section. This shows the build scenario analysis, which means we assume 4 lanes on 41 and we get pretty good level of service. So in order to maintain acceptable levels of service, by the time 2035 traffic comes in place, we do need 4 lanes on this section. For the 4-lane section, there were 2 alternatives that were developed, and the first one was assuming 12-foot lanes, 2 lanes in each direction, and we also proposed to have bike lanes on each side and sidewalks. And alternative 2 is pretty much the same with 11-foot lanes. This schematic here shows a preliminary layout with the 4 lanes, and it also shows the proposed pond locations. There's a pond there. This is the county line, and thus the railroad crossing. Moving north, thus Mediterra, and there's a pond location proposed there. And those are the accesses to the business on the west side. And this is the Bonita Beach intersection. The alternative 2, I don't have a graphic here, but it's pretty much the same with 11-foot lanes, so I didn't put a graphic. One of the key issues that Domingo just mentioned was the railroad crossing, and it's in poor condition right now, so the first thing we identified was the improvements to this crossing to make it a gated, signalized crossing. And we also proposed to put gates for the pedestrians on each side, so the people can enter accidentally while a train is operating. The other key issues, including the railroad crossing or utilities, and there is one lift station operated by BSU. We are coordinating with them. That one probably need to be relocated when the roadway gets widened. Right-of-way, most of the right-of-way impacts, the roadway itself can be accommodated within the existing right-of-way, but for ponds, we do require additional right-of-way. The other key element is access management. The key here is today, Old 41 is 2 lanes, undivided, and pretty much anybody can enter the business from both sides. But when it goes to divided with a median, we have to consolidate some of those driveways, and for that we need some additional turn lanes. We already accommodated those in the preliminary concepts. Moving along into the cost, once we establish the 2 alternatives, we have some preliminary costs, and these costs are based on the FDOT numbers and also some right-of-way costs that we obtained from the city. Alternative 1 costs $13.8 million, and alternative 2 costs $13.5. As you can see, there's not a significant difference between the 2. And just keeping in mind the funding scenario, and if it can be divided into individual components, we also estimated cost for the railroad itself, and also the cost for segment 1 and segment 2, the segment 1 being the southern section from the county line to just north of the railroad crossing, which includes the cost of the railroad improvement. Segment 2 will be rest of the section to the north. And this is a detailed breakdown of the cost that includes the right-of-way and maintenance of traffic, design, and everything. The first table shows for railroad crossing, and the second one for the segments divided into 1 and 2. Just a brief comparison of the 2 alternatives and the no-build. They have a good economic community development. We have better access to businesses and residentials. There were no significant impacts as far as the wetlands or even environmental with either of the alternatives. The project cost I just mentioned is 13.8 versus 13.5. A good capacity improvement, safety improvements with the build alternative, and some utility relocation impacts. Domingo will give you a summary.
So
Just to recap, the difference between alternative 1 and alternative 2 is that one has 11-foot lanes, one has 12-foot lanes and alternative 2 has 11-foot lanes. We feel that order of magnitude, there's such a small difference in cost that it's better to go with the 12-foot lanes and you know, do that kind of cross-section. Bottom line is, as far as I know, finances are tight everywhere. If you need to prioritize a section of this improvement, we would think probably the railroad rehabilitation should be the first thing. The second is the intersection of Bonita Beach Road and Old 41. That's really probably the choking point in that corridor. But as long as Collier County doesn't have any plans to widen the section south of us, I think you're probably going to get a few years where you're going to be okay with 2 lanes, but the traffic projections basically say, yes, you have a need for 4 lanes in the future. So with that, if you have any questions, that's our presentation.
Okay, why don't we start with questions? The staff recommendation is none at this time, so, but this is our opportunity. Martha, you waved first.
Yes. Surprise. Can you go to the slide with build alternative 1 at the intersection of Bonita Beach Road and Old 41 Road?
Sure.
And while we're getting there, you took into account, I'm sure, just to let people and the public out there on TV land know, you took into account all the future build-outs of the zoning we've already approved.
Yes, it's already including whatever is committed to and funded. Yes.
Very good. Okay. My question to you is, at this corner, number 1, there's an existing business at that corner. Would that require removing that existing business right at let's see, below Old 41 to the right at the corner?
Southeast corner.
Yeah, well, but there's no legend on there that says north, southeast, and west.
The answer to your question, Madam Council, it's no. There's just a minor clip of that business. They might lose some of the parking, but no, not the entire restaurant or whatever is there needs to be taken.
Well, my and this is directed to my colleagues here. You have 2 ponds there, right? If that existing business weren't there anymore, you could just have 1 pond at the corner and a big fountain and glorious, beautiful beautification, something.
Yes, yes.
That's that's a community decision and not one that I.
Yeah, and actually for that business to maintain relatively ease of entrance and exit once this is widening, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge because they're going to be right on the right turn lane, and that's kind of the only way they're going to be able to get in and out is out of the outside right turn lane. So it's going to be a challenge to keep them functioning happy.
Yeah, and it's already a challenge. So, as we go, I don't know that we can really approve alternative 1 or 2 without knowing what their plans are in the future. And it would seem to me if they are not committed to their business, I know we have a new business in there, and I'm committed to them. They have really good donuts. But the owners have had that piece of property for a very long time. It is not owned by the dog track, which is all that big vacant property there. It makes it kind of difficult for planning in that area. But thank you. I agree the intersection and the railroad. Okay. And you said 2035 will be when we get to F if we don't do this?
Well, 2035, you will definitely have F. Between now and 2035, you will reach F. So it all depends, how we are with development right now. We're on a standstill, but if things pick up again, it could be 5 years, it could be 10 years.
Did you ever figure in the potential of having, the railroad line is there, of having a depot for passenger rail in the area?
No, we haven't considered that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? Carl, do you have anything to say about where we stand? Could you sort of articulate a little bit where this project stands in the bigger scheme of things?
Well, right now, the council has directed that the connection of Shangri-La is number 1 on the priority list. Terry's behind that. Number two, we are watching Logan, but that is not an expense to the city, but we're watching that project anyway. Old 41 is something we're current. Obviously, Bonita Beach Road, phases 2 and 3 are under consideration as well. So this is somewhere in the mix, probably a little bit down the line. I will tell you that in my discussions with Mr. Walk, that our concerns need to be with the railroad crossing first, which is what you've heard today, because reconstruction of that particular facility may have to occur even prior to some of the widenings that we're talking about here, just because of the conditions and whatever. We want to make sure if that has to go forward before roadway widenings, that it's done in a fashion that it will match up with the designs for both the north and south portions of this roadway.
And so we're going to have, so basically the first thing to happen will be that railroad
We're
reconstruction.
certainly paying attention to that, yes, sir.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Gentlemen, thank you very much. It was very enlightening.
Nice to see Mr. Soleil back in the audience.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Next item, 6F, presentation of the compensation study by Katie Miller-Bush.
Thank you. Council will recall that last fall we were talking about, for a variety of different reasons, the salaries of the employees in the city. Council recognized that we really did not know where we stand as far as our salaries and our benefits, our total compensation packages, and how they compare against other cities as well as the private sector. Council directed staff to hire a consultant to look into that in a very objective way. That has been done. We did go through a selection process and retained HR compensation consultants, and in particular Katie Miller-Bush, who's a principal at that firm. And Katie is here today to provide the results of that study. Katie.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
How are y'all? Good. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So you all received a copy of the presentation and a copy of the report, yes?
Right.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is to attempt to take a whole lot of analysis that was done over a couple of months and boil it down to a simple 15, 20-minute presentation to review the report. I do have a pen, so feel free to ask your questions because I will write those down, and to review all of this data as quickly as possible. Okay? So with that said, let me tell you a little bit about myself, just so you know who I am. I was born in Miami. I am a native Floridian. I went to Florida Atlantic University and was fortunate enough to go to the wrong bulletin board when I was a senior in college. It was called Personnel. That was the name of the bulletin board. And there was an ad for someone to write job descriptions and do salary surveys. And they needed someone who preferably was interested in government and was good with computers. And I thought to myself, well, I'm great with computers. I've written some job descriptions, and I was student council president, so I think that qualifies me as being interested in government. So long story short, I ended up working for a boutique consulting firm that was focused on public sector compensation and classification studies. Who knew that this work existed? And so for 7 years, I had the opportunity to travel around the United States and to learn about city and county government primarily, and also had some opportunity to work in state agencies and to really learn about all of the different operations of a local government. After about 7 years of traveling all over the U.S., I thought, you know, I've heard that the private sector is so different. I really need to go get a job in the private sector. And so I went to go work for a company in the HR department. And interestingly enough, all of those techniques of developing compensation plans, of establishing internal equity and doing market studies was exactly the same professional type of techniques that were used in the private sector, with some minor differences. Of course, I had the opportunity to work on incentive programs, long-term incentive programs, bonus structures, et cetera. So after about 3 years in the private sector, I decided to start my own business. And I moved back to South Florida. I'm from Palm Beach County. and decided to start my own business. And so since 2003, I've had the opportunity to work again with local government and also with companies in the private sector. And so I've had all of this experience to bring to the table, not only government, but also private sector, in developing compensation and classification plans. So that's a little bit about me. And if we could focus in on y'all. So today, we're going to go over what the project overview was. We're going to talk about establishing internal equity and how that was done for the city of Bonita Springs. We'll talk about the labor market in terms of who we surveyed, what we found. Ultimately, we're trying to answer the question, where are we? Okay? Not where we're going, because that certainly is something that you all will be able to provide guidance to, and that'll be the next step in this. But right now, we want to find out, where are we? So in the presentation, if you'll turn to how a pay plan is developed, and this is in your report. This is just a general overview. 4 major steps. Basically, you have to look internal first, right? You've got to get some sort of organization around what jobs do we have, what do we call them, what are we asking folks to do, and that's called establishing internal equity. Then we need to go out into the labor market and we need to gather information as a reference point to what others who have positions like ours, what they're paying for positions that are similar to ours. And then once we bring those 2 components together, we can start doing some real analysis in terms of creating a structure, laying a foundation, and then incrementally moving towards where the council and the city wants to be relative to that labor market. Okay? So step 1, and this is on page 4 of the report, obviously is one of the most important steps, is employee involvement. Employees provided great information about the work they do. They gave us information about what the minimum qualifications are for jobs, told us about what sort of previous experience they think or would recommend is needed to do the work, let us know about licenses and certifications, et cetera. And supervisors confirmed the information in these position questionnaires, and it was great because then we were able to create job descriptions. So again, talking about incremental foundation, this now provides the opportunity for the city to have reference to job descriptions in a standard format. As you begin to grow, you might start recruiting for specific positions. Now we have standard job descriptions you can use for recruiting. We did ask for manager feedback in terms of how they felt jobs were internally evaluated or ranked within their own departments. But obviously, based on our experience and being able to see all of these different jobs, HRCC was the one that made the final recommendation or determination as to role and level. If you'll turn to the next page, and this is referenced in your report as well. How do we go about establishing internal equity? There are many ways to establish internal equity, but in my experience, what I've found is if we can keep it simple, if we can use a standard that managers understand, that it's easy to understand and it's easy to explain, then now we have consistency. Now, or a higher level of consistency. We've got managers across departments all looking at jobs using a standard language. In this particular case, we recommended a classification methodology called a role and level methodology. So you pick which role a job plays within an organization, and then you pick the level at which the job falls, whether that be entry, intermediate, senior, or lead worker. Now, at this point, it's really important to point out we're not talking about people. We're talking about jobs, okay? So internal equity is establishing an order of jobs within an organization. Supervisor, likely to be a leader, right? Because supervisor's primary responsibility is people management. Customer service rep, where do you think that fits? Usually at the associate level. That's usually a service or production-oriented position. What about attorney? Usually fits in the professional category, right? Requires some sort of formal education. This system is easy to understand and easy to use, and best of all, easy to maintain, so we can ensure consistency going forward. So once we have internal equity, we have to put order to the information. And one of the things we like to do is to create a very simple career progression chart. That's on page 5 and 6 of your report. And again, what you see here is how jobs stack up relative to one another. We've put grades next to the roles and levels, and that assists us ultimately when we look at the market. Okay? So let's talk about the labor market. And if I could tell you a story quickly, how many of you have bought a car recently, the last couple of years? Okay. Let me tell you a very quick story about a car that I bought. I narrowed it down. I knew I wanted a 2006 Volvo SUV, and I sort of had some color preferences, but for the most part, when you look at that particular model, about 90% of the items on the car come standard: cruise control, sunroof, all of that, right? There's some specifics, there's some differences. Heated seats would have been nice, the Bluetooth built in, the little beeping when you back up, okay? So where am I going with the story? Well, when I, of course, put my husband on the to-do to go out and find out how much these cars cost, he threw out a pretty wide net. We live in Boynton Beach, Florida, so we looked as far north as St. Lucie County. On the West Coast, we looked at Tampa, Naples, Miami, because what we were searching for is what is the value of this car. As it turns out, the value of that car ranged anywhere from $18,000 to $26,000. So the value of the car was a range of 18 to 26. So was the car worth 18,000? Well, yeah, because someone was willing to sell it for that much, right? Was it worth 26? Yeah, because someone was worth selling it for that much. The key was, how much was I willing to buy the car for? So what was the value of that particular vehicle to me? Relatively conservative, just to tell you the answer, it was $21,000, okay? So it was generally in the ballpark. So the value of that car was 18 to 26. I personally was willing to pay 21, somewhere in the middle. And the reason I share that story with you about cars is that often when we look at labor market data, folks want to focus in on a particular number. And in fact, to do analysis, it's much easier if you focus in on a particular number. And in our case, we selected the market average to focus in on and to do analysis. But there's a range of values that companies pay, cities pay, people are willing to pay for work. And that's a key piece of information to remember, is that we're looking at a range of pay, which is part of the reason why we establish pay structures. And we establish minimum pay and maximum pay to put some sort of order around all of this data. You see here the agencies that we selected to review were ones that gave us a flavor of what was being paid around the state, specifically in the southern portion of the state. So Clearwater represents Tampa, St. Pete. Wellington over on the East Coast gives us a representation of Palm Beach County, St. Lucie County. In particular, they're also government light, so that was an interesting point of reference. And then obviously our local cities and counties. Is there anyone exactly like the city of Bonita Springs? I mean, and other cities that order their jobs just like we do? No. So we look at jobs and we look at skill set transferability. We look at it from the perspective of, say, an accountant. So if an accountant is going to go get a job in another city or at the county or in the private sector, we want to know what is it that's being offered out there. What's that range of data? And so you see here, if we turn to the next slide, just to give you a sense of where we fit relative to the survey. And this is on page 7 of your report. For the most part, the city data, there were a lot more city matches. That would be expected. They're in the same business as y'all, right? City to city. Obviously, we need to look at the county because those are so close by in terms of, and similar, local organizations. The private sector data that we used was provided by Economic Research Institute. It's not, it is a single data point, but that single data point is representative of hundreds and sometimes thousands of responses. And so while it makes up a small portion of all of the information, it does represent a good piece of information in terms of what's being offered by other local private sector employers. So did any of these cities or organizations sort of stand out as the market leader? I went through and counted, I sorted and said, okay, well, did Sanibel, for example, how many times did they show up in the first, second, or third ranking? It was about 20% of the time. What about Collier County? About 10% of the time. So none of these organizations showed up as a consistent market leader in terms of in every single case they were the ones that were paying the most. And when we look at market data, what we're looking for is a clustering of information. We're looking for a central tendency. We are looking for consistency in terms of the levels. So not only do we look at a particular job, but we also look at how that job fits within that organization as well. And we use that information to then ultimately create a pay structure. But before we create a pay structure, one of the questions that council asked, really the whole purpose of doing this study was to say, how does our current pay, so we're talking about what we actually pay individual people, how does that fit relative to these market average reference points? Now, I chose market average because that's the number generally in the middle, okay, and it gives you a reference for what we're actually paying people. How does that fit relative to these market data points? And for the most part, we're looking at jobs, about 22 jobs where the city is paying more than 10% below. So let's walk through an example of that. You have 22 jobs that are more than 10% away from that market average. So they're 15% away, 16% away, 17% away. So that, in my experience, in the private sector and the public sector, is a bit more on the lower end than we're used to seeing. Now, based on what we know about the city and the city's pay practices, this is probably due to the lack of a formalized structure. So in the past, city jobs, when we needed another maintenance worker, for example, or we needed someone to do some sort of accounting work for us, would go out and, in essence, look at individual positions, not people, individual jobs, and establish some sort of pay range around that particular job. And so that could be part of the explanation on why current pay, what we're currently paying people, is relatively low compared to the market average in terms of what we normally would see. Okay? So let's talk about that structure, because current pay is important, but the reality is we're talking about jobs first, because we have to put order around jobs, and we need to create a structure. So again, we're laying that incremental foundation. We already established the internal equity. We already know what the roles and the levels are of jobs within the organization. We now have this market data reference point. Okay, so we now know what others are paying for jobs like ours. But how do we put those two pieces together so we can truly begin to evaluate what we're currently paying? And so we need to establish a structure. So the market position, again, I just want to point out that we used is market average. Council may choose to use a different position, but this is pretty standard in terms of compensation analysis. It's a place to start in creating a pay structure. So on page 8 of the report, we go into establishing minimum pay and maximum pay. So now, remember the car example? It was 18 to 26. That was the range of data. And that number in the middle is what we consider to be a midpoint. If we were to average all of the data points together, we come up with a market average. We then need to use that information to establish minimum pay and maximum, and we did that using a pretty traditional technique of creating a 50% spread. So if I can share with you just a quick example, because it's not quite intuitive in terms of how we establish minimum pay and how we establish maximum pay. We use the standard technique of using 20% on either side, so 20% of the midpoint to establish minimum, 20%, 120% of the midpoint to establish maximum. That actually creates a 50% spread. So the 50% spread is the difference between maximum and minimum. So just a quick example, we take the midpoint as our control point. We then, let's say it's $10. We take 80% of that to establish minimum pay. So that'd be $8. We take 120% of that control point, that $10, to establish maximum pay. So that's $12. The difference between the 12 and the 8, so the maximum and the minimum, is $4, divided by the minimum, which is 8. That gives us the 50% spread. And I explained this in the report. I just want to give an example here. Pretty traditional, nothing out of line here in pay structure development. Okay, so now we have a structure. So remember before we talked about where current average pay fell relative to those market average reference points. Now we're talking about a structure. So now we've put a structure in place. It's the next step of the analysis, and we're looking specifically at that number in the middle, that pay structure midpoint. Where does that pay structure midpoint fall relative to the market average? Quick example in your report on page 19. Just want to, it's the last page. Easy enough to flip to. Looking at the two lines up at the top. Again, we're not talking about people, we're talking about jobs. So I'm talking specifically about the two jobs at the top, the receptionist office assistant and the recreation center attendant. You'll notice that those two jobs have in common that they are both an associate 1 and they're assigned to a grade 1. So they have something in common. They share the role and level and also the grade. What you'll notice here, if you look in the column marked market average, is that the market average for the receptionist office assistant is actually higher than the recreation center attendant. So remember that market average is a reference point. So we have two jobs in the same grade that have a different market value. So what we need to do is develop a pay structure that will incorporate both of those jobs, and we've recommended a proposed midpoint of $27,000. So the receptionist office assistant, the market average of $30,000, just over $30,000, is actually greater than the proposed midpoint. Okay? So the pay structure is more than 10% less than the market average reference point. It's different though for the recreation center attendant. The recreation center attendant, the market value is just over $26,000. The proposed pay structure's midpoint is $27,000. So the structure is closer to the market reference point for that particular position. So we talked previously about pay. Then we looked at now where does the structure fit relative to all of that market data. And this helps us in terms of an evaluation to see how we're, again, incrementally laying that foundation to fit all of the city jobs and position them relative to the labor market. Okay. I'd like to pause at this point and ask for any questions before we get into some what could be rather complicated scenarios. And what I'd like to do is to say to y'all that at this point I would definitely recommend, and I'm going to share with you some implementation scenarios. I'm going to talk about the benefits portion of the work that we did. It's going to become pretty apparent to you, I believe, that our recommendation is at this point that you give guidance to staff. Ask staff to go back and really go through all of this information and look at different implementation scenarios and how it affects people. Because at this point in our study and analysis, we've talked about jobs. So what is the job? How does the job fit internally? What's being paid for comparable skill set in the labor market by others that we compete with for talent? Now that we've created a structure, what do we do with it? Let's first confirm the market position. Is that the best market position for us? Can we afford that at this particular point in time? How does it impact the people that work here? So how does the current pay for individuals fit within this new structure? And how do we as an organization, given our various business considerations, want to implement this sort of structure?
Okay, let's have some questions, and then I think, Carl, if you can give us some thoughts in terms of where you want to go from here in terms of how much more detail today versus in the future, I guess. So, questions, anyone? Comments? Thoughts?
I think we have an expert in this field at the end, so I just.
That's crazy.
Is that crazy? Well, I do have
let me-
questions, but I
let me just say,
defer.
I don't know where we are on, you're taking a pause, or is?
This is a pause, yes, because there is some more information to share in terms of implementation scenarios, and
Let me just comment. I think protocol's right. The approach to this thing is correct, and I would think that what you have in front of you is good logical data. Everybody gets a little concerned when the population sample is small, but that's what we have to work with. So to answer Mr. Steinmeier's questions, I don't think you can ever accurately put a salary on someone. That's why you have a range to allow them to perform against standards. So you're really not only paying for their talent, you're paying for their performance as well, and that's why you have a range. But as far as the material itself goes, I think it's solid, and I would suggest that whatever staff decides to bring forward to council in the future on how to handle it, I'm willing to accept that approach. Martha, thank you.
May I?
Yes, you
Thank
may.
you, sir. When you first started the study, I have 3 questions, so I'm going to ask them all at once, and then you can figure out how to put them all together in your answer. Okay, one is, does Bonita Government Light look much different than other municipalities in regards to organizational structure? Because I'm not sure, a quick explanation, I'm not sure if our philosophical, guideline, which is kind of contract government, was included in your analysis. Okay, if Government Light, why were we not compared to Weston, Sandy Springs, Georgia? I always hear that one. And Fort Myers Beach, which also supposedly has the same approach. And the last one is, did you see any undertones of dissatisfaction among the employees through this, with how things are going? Doing the interviews? That would be important to me, and I'm interested to hear your explanation. I'm also glad that you recognize that our city attorney is a leader, according to our charter, so we can't just put her down as a professional. Back to the Government Light. Professionals that are in a P5, P4, P3 here, in regards to the Government Light, when you compared, no offense, Public Works, you are awesome, I love you. But when you compared like a Public Works senior manager or director, Public Works in other cities do different things than our Public Works do. Mostly ours are like contract supervisors and engineers that are giving us their specific opinion about contracts that we've put out there or studies that we put out there, because we don't have internal departments doing that kind of work. You took that into account when you did this study?
Yes.
Okay, good.
That was 4, but go ahead.
That was 4, okay. Who's counting? Come on.
I was.
Okay, I noticed.
Okay, so to address your first question, does Bonita's government light approach to business or to government, and the fact that your organizational structure is different, and the example that you just gave with Public Works is a great example in terms of them being contract administrators, or you're looking more for the strategic overview of what they know about that particular project versus the ability to go and do the project. Compared to other cities, was that taken into consideration? The answer in general is yes, and here's how. When you look at the internal equity in other organizations, that was one of the things that we evaluated in addition to our own Bonita Springs internal equity. So first, let's start at the bottom. So maintenance worker. Maintenance worker? It's a maintenance worker. Required to do some different things, but in general, we're looking for the same sort of skill set. So that skill set is highly transferable and is probably generally very similar to what we would find in other organizations. As you continue to go up through the chain, what Bonita Springs, because of your approach to government light, what you don't have is the luxury of specialty. So you don't get to have a job that just does what fits in this little box. Because we don't have that many people and the staffing is lower, you have to have someone that can do this box and that box, and sometimes this other box too. So in terms of hats, you can see that's pretty evident in some of the mid-management, the professional type positions, and some of the leader positions, and some of the lower level positions that you're asking people to do many things. And so what we're looking for from a market perspective is what is the skill set transferability to other positions. So where can we match to those other boxes in other cities? And then if we were to take a big picture and put all of that information together, what would that job generally be worth? And that's how we balance the internal equity and the external competitiveness.
So in that event, when you rated somebody like at 109% or something of a salary range, you could make justification that they're probably wearing 3 hats, and so that you could see why somebody probably paid them that.
In your particular case, obviously we focused in on jobs, but certainly some jobs are single-member incumbent positions. And there are many reasons why a particular pay of an individual is what it is today. I mean, there's many reasons. It could be increases over time. It could be what the person was asking for at that particular point when we needed someone to do that kind of work. And it could be because we were looking at the skill set of the individual and their ability to wear many hats. So there's many reasons that go into how actual pay got to be where it is. Remember, we first were looking at jobs, and then we were looking at the structure. And so where does that pay of people, because obviously people work here, where does that pay fit? There are so many other elements. You've got performance. You've got the overall benefits package. So there's a lot of data that goes into what do we do with this information. Your second question was about Weston and Fort Myers Beach, and then where in Georgia?
Springs.
Oh, Sandy Springs.
Three contract government models.
Sandy Springs, north of Atlanta.
I guess so.
Okay. Fort Myers Beach actually did participate in the survey. So, so that was there. You know, we didn't include Weston. Could we have? Sure. Could you direct staff to move forward in throwing that data point in there as well? Yes. In terms of trying to get a representative sample, though, for the East Coast, we used Wellington as a point of reference on the top versus across Alligator Alley using that particular data point. And again, you all are generally in the ballpark. I mean, you're at the lower end of the ballpark. But Georgia, I wouldn't necessarily recommend, because then we're getting a little too far out of scope, because our net really does need to include a representative sample of where we think people are going to come from, which is why it's heavily weighted in the local market where people are willing to drive for work. And then employee satisfaction was your last question. In this approach to the study, we did not physically interview employees. So we gave them a questionnaire to fill out, and they completed that information, shared that with their supervisors who confirmed the information. In there was no, the questions were really focused on the facts of their job. Yeah, more of like, what is it that they're required to do and how do they do that? And what are the minimum qualifications for the position?
Yeah, you might read, I have to do this, darn it. You know what I mean?
No, very professional answers, very
Great
straightforward. Yeah, very complete responses. We got 100% response.
Awesome.
So yeah, very happy about that.
Okay. Anyone else?
Thank you.
Yeah. Steve, thank you. Katie,
Yes.
Many times the legal department has to contract out for a specialty for whatever reason. Does that fit anywhere in the equation in terms of looking at salaries?
Not exactly. There's no, we're looking at the skill set necessary and what we need for that position to be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily how they get it done. So whether that's in-house legal staff that's doing that, or and it's very common to contract out certain facets of various legal work. The reality is what we're paying our legal staff is to know not necessarily all of the intricacies of a particular field, but to know that bigger picture generally. Are they following the right practice? Have we dotted our I's and crossed our T's? Have they looked at all of the different scenarios? That's what we're paying. That's the skill set we're paying for.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Carl, do you want to jump in for a minute, or are you
I think we ought to continue the presentation at this point, sir.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you all. Okay.
Thank you.
This is my passion. You'll forgive me. So so let me just quickly tell you about some implementation scenarios, because this is where it really gets to be fun, where you can look at compa ratio analysis, which is going really into where does our pay fall relative to that midpoint. And we started to do some of that analysis. You see that in Appendix D in terms of where the current pay falls. But what do we do with that really gets into looking at the individual skills, looking at the experience levels, looking at what that person brings to the table in terms of the multiple hats that they wear, and the services and experience levels and performance that they provide to the city. Once you start moving individual pay, or you put in a structure, then you have to start looking at something called pay compression. So that's another step in the implementation scenario. And then probably some of the bigger considerations are business considerations in terms of affordability. What's our competitive stance? Where does our pay fall relative to our overall benefits package? Does our benefits package, is that our competitive advantage, or are we we're competing with for employees? That's an element, an important element, and the things that we offer that are different from our competitors, we need to get credit for in terms of selling our benefits package and our overall package on the reason why someone would want to come work here. And we also want to make sure that the pay structure will support performance management and pay administration going forward. So there's all of these different scenarios. And if you turn to page, oh my goodness, 16 of the presentation, in the report, these are all three charts are combined. I just wanted to point out here that the gray column in the middle is what we had looked at originally back on slide 10. That was to answer the question, where is current average pay relative to those market reference points? Then we went and built a structure, and we said, okay, and where does that structure fall relative to those market reference points? Now on the right-hand side, what we're looking at is current pay within that proposed structure. So this is part of that compensation compa ratio analysis, answering the question, how does our current pay fit into the new structure? And just about implementation scenarios, our general guidance, and obviously we will continue to work with city staff in identifying the best implementation scenario. What you want to do with implementation scenarios is you want to come up with a plan so that you can be consistent in the plan and then obviously apply it to individual people and individual circumstances, but we really want to use a consistent technique that really has nothing to do with people. So we want to look at under minimum. So folks are currently paid under minimum. If it's a percentage, say 5%, we could be okay with that. And we would manage pay under minimum. But if it's a larger amount, we may choose to move them into the structure. Performance obviously factors in, so you have to look at the performance of the individual before you make any decisions on giving them pay increases. And then are we going to go to minimum? Or are we going to go above minimum? And how long is that going to take? You know, there's that affordability factor. Is it 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? And then you have folks who are over maximum, whose current pay is over the maximum of the proposed structure. And give you an example, and again, we're talking about jobs, not people, okay? But just as an example, that receptionist office assistant, very important job. Where it fits within this organization relative to the overall market data is that we might be paying a little too much for that particular position. Council could do nothing. You could simply redline the pay of the person in that job. You could reduce the pay to the maximum over time. You can obviously work with that individual in identifying where they might add additional value to the organization. There's all of these different factors that go in that really you should give staff the time to go through and analyze. On the benefits, just again, what we were looking for here was a sense of where we fit in. So in terms of broad terms, are there any areas for improvement? So we looked at the benefit offerings that the city has. We looked at employer costs. As you can imagine, it was a rather detailed analysis that we provided to you in a report, a summary of that information. There were some key areas that stood out. What we were looking for is to create a profile, to look at in aggregate, public sector versus private sector, where did we stand with our benefits? And then also to look specifically locally in terms of employers that were like us in the local market, where did we stack up relative to their benefits offerings? And our focus here was benefits as a share of total compensation. Because this is what's going to help the city identify where do we position our structure, our overall pay, relative to the big picture, relative to the package of compensation and benefits. And so we wanted to look specifically, were there some plan design changes that y'all might want to consider? Are there some policy changes? So that was our focus when we went in and looked specifically at the benefits. Now, hey, who better to ask in terms of public versus private than a study that was conducted over the course of 20 years, right? We want to look at the big picture. We want to look at it over time. We've had some economic situations where, you know, we're in a recession right now. So if we're looking over a long period of time, we're likely to get, you know, those other changing market conditions that we've experienced. So we know that there are key differences. I think we hear this all the time on the news, that there is a big difference between private sector and public sector benefits. And what I wanted to know was how much. And in fact, this study, that was the main purpose of the study was to say, are there differences? What are those key differences? And by how much? How much are we really talking about? And so one of the things that I thought was very interesting was that the wages of local public sector versus private sector in Florida. Now, obviously, the study over 20 years was done in multiple states, but specifically, how does that impact our state? It's very interesting that it was only off by such a small percentage, which basically says there's no perceivable difference in those public sector and private sector wages. So why is that? So my theory on why that is in Florida in particular versus some of the other states that I've worked in is that we have many small companies. And so we have, in terms of our ability to pay, we have many people who are organizations that are relatively small. We don't have the big GMs and GEs, et cetera, here. So that's my theory on why that's less. Is there a difference in benefits? Yeah, absolutely. As a share of total compensation, there's a 3.5% difference. Okay, good information. Good to know in terms of just comparing overall general to the private sector, what that difference is. And that should ultimately factor into our look at the pay structure and the benefits package. If you'll turn to the next page. In the report, I had identified that there were two key areas. One was specifically voluntary benefits, and the other was in the area of paid time off. Those are two key areas that are definitely worth looking into in terms of what are we doing? Is our practice the best practice for the city? Are there some areas where we could look at perhaps capping certain paid time off benefits? Can we look at the plan design as it relates to our overall voluntary benefits, and then looking at that relative to the pay structure? So what I'd like to recommend at this time, Carl, is for add any points, and then for any other questions.
Carl, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you.
And then if we have any last questions, we can hit those.
Right. Obviously, there's a lot involved in this report. Not something that the staff is prepared to make a recommendation on today. You know, clearly we need to retain the good employees that we have. We need to worry about rewarding them, making sure that their salaries and their benefits are competitive. However, in those studies, we need to take a look at any recommendations we make, what would be the implications of those and the cost of those, and whether or not it fits within the public policy realm of the council's thoughts about where we fit in the marketplace and where we should be as a public policy matter. And so at this time, first off, I want to thank Katie for a great presentation, a great report. There's a lot here. We would like the opportunity, if council will so direct, to have this back to us. Let us take a closer look at this, work with Katie a little bit additionally, and come back with some specific options and perhaps a staff recommendation at a later date as to what the city might do regarding this study, if it please the council.
Comments, anyone?
I have
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, Martha has a comment, and then
What a surprise.
somebody can make a motion.
Yeah, and I would make that motion to direct it to staff to come back later date with a recommendation and their thoughts, and we'll take those into consideration.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, and
A
for
bunch of
discussion
seconds.
purposes, just real quick.
Real quick.
Real quick. Contrary to popular belief, this is a fascinating study if, you know, you're nerdy about stuff like this. And we need to be, you know, because it's taxpayers' money, and, you know, we need to know where it's going, how it's going out. And there's been so much talk about how the, you know, public employees or, you know, whatever. But I found it fascinating that, as you had mentioned, that local public sector employees in Florida make less than the private sector, okay? And that the total compensation is higher for private sector employees because of incentive plans. We have none of that in the public sector. Yeah, their benefits are a greater share, but overall, they are making less and actually doing a public service. So I just, you know, I want to back them up. in so saying that, okay, I forget where I was going with this, sorry. When we consider benefits to those employees, you're looking at, in the pay structure, 20 years out, whatever, how that changes when you recommended this structure to us, or that's just contemporary, just, at this time?
Right. At this particular point in time, the pay structure looks only at what other local area employers are paying for skills and for jobs that are similar to the ones that we have. So the pay structure itself looks just at that. So that's sort of like part A of the puzzle. Part B is then our benefits that we offer, and how do those benefits stack up relative to private sector employers and our local public sector. And so that's piece B. And then when we look at total compensation, that's when we add those two components together.
So the private sector total compensation is higher. That's what you said here?
Yes.
Okay. Anyhow, I thank you for this very detailed study. It's fascinating, and I think this is going to help us get a handle on it.
Steve?
Yeah, just for our employees and professionals out there, this is a framework. I don't think anybody needs to worry that, in my opinion, this council is going to come in and do anything drastic and dramatic immediately. So please don't lose sleep if you're over maximum or over midpoint. Let's take a look at this thing, do a logical approach to how we're going to handle the differences, and give us enough trust that we'll make sure that we do the right thing for our employees.
That's correct.
Anyone else? Steve?
Oh, Katie, you know what? Do you figure bonuses that the private sector provides their employees?
That was, yes.
It's part of the total compensation.
It is?
Right. Analysis, and that's, but it's very broad in terms of the percentage of incentive compensation relative to total comp.
Yeah, because you can have employees making $37,000, they get a $1,500 bonus at the end of the year. That's not anything we're capable of doing, so. Okay.
Okay. Anyone else? Martha has one more.
I remembered
Anybody
where
before
I was
Martha?
going
Okay,
with
Martha.
that. And now you just made a joke and I forgot. My God, what an airhead. Okay. Oh, okay. If you didn't bring, because we all said, oh, let's bring in the private sector because there was some kind of notion that our employees were making, on some people's part, that our employees were making more than the private sector. If you didn't bring the private sector in as a comparison, would the the ranges have been lower? Yes.
Great question.
Okay, that's
actually, well, the answer is no.
Really?
Yeah. And remember, in overall picture, the market, the wages of public sector versus private sector in Florida, they're so close. I mean, it's almost, they're imperceptible in terms of their differences. So I looked at that. Let me turn to my page real quick. In terms of, was the private sector data, which represented obviously hundreds and sometimes thousands of data points, was that consistently like the highest data point in every job? And the answer is no. It wasn't. It was in the ballpark. In 6% of the cases, the private sector was either 1, 2, or 3 in terms of the highest data point, but so was Fort Myers. Lee County was 7%. And then as you go up, I mean, Collier County was 10% of the cases. So the answer was no. And that's what I was looking for, because I wanted to test that overall evaluation of that study that was done over 20 years. So I wanted to see if was that truly the case. And it is.
Okay, so figuring in the private sector in our salary ranges did not change.
It didn't bump them up.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I'd like to make one last comment. I appreciate this presentation a lot, and I like the that framework of associate technical professional leadership. And I think we need to, when I say we, I think I'm talking about you all proceeding on this. What we saw today was a technical / professional presentation. Carl, his senior staff, and the 7 people that are sitting up here are going to have to apply that leadership and apply, Katie said any number of times, I'm talking about jobs, not people. leadership includes both looking at those jobs and skill sets and the people that live and breathe and support families and everything else. And that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the challenges are, and that's why the 7 of us are up here, and we hire people like Carl and Audrey to do their thing too. So it's I think this is going to be a great baseline, a great anchor to refer to as this council exhibits its leadership in terms of trying to make sure that we're doing the right thing. The second point I'd like to make is after 12 years, we all need to recognize this city was built from Paul Pass running around town with a box with some papers in it to 60-some employees and a multi-million-dollar budget. And after 12 years, I think it's about time that we take a good technical scientific look at things. And I think is what we're hearing is it's not perfect, but what is, but it ain't too bad, and but can be but can be improved a little bit. And
At least now you know where you are.
yeah, and I think we're all going to bring our prejudices in terms of agreeing or disagreeing with some of those conclusions, but that's what leadership and that's what politics is all about. So, Katie, thanks for a great presentation.
You're welcome.
And thanks for the audience for your patience, because this was longer than that 15 or 20 minutes she promised us, but we knew it would be.
But it's important, right?
Okay, there's a motion on motion
you.
and second to direct staff to further dig into this and come back with some specific recommendations. Any further final discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Martin?
Aye.
Councilman Slakta?
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Spear?
Aye.
Councilwoman Simons?
Aye.
Councilman Lockhart?
Aye.
Councilman McIntosh?
Aye.
Okay, do we want to take a short break here, or do we want to plow through a couple things here and get to public comment before break?
Short break.
Consent so those folks can go home.
Oh, let's do consent agenda. Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second
Second.
that.
Okay, nobody wants to pull anything on consent agenda? Good. Roll call, please.
Councilman Slakta?
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Spear?
Aye.
Councilwoman Simons?
Aye.
Councilman Lockhart?
Aye.
Councilman McIntosh?
Aye.
Councilwoman Martin?
Aye.
Okay,
Awesome.
take a 10-minute break. It's 10:32. That'll be 10:45. We'll be back.
Oh, that's 8 minutes.